Protocol having been so well established by Colin, permit me to simply say good evening, brothers and sisters, ladies and gentlemen, comrades, all. I think, Janine, you use a very dangerous phrase there, feature address. I am a man, I belong to the Fidel Castro School of Oratory, where we speak for 3 and 4 hours. But honestly, I wish I could speak for at least an hour this evening, because what we are doing this evening is so rich, is so wonderful. To come here to speak about rhythm and resistance, the role of Calypso, and for me to be given the mission to set the tone by speaking a bit about the struggle of oppressed people as epitomized by Coffee in 1675. This event in this wonderful school hall is really what our season of emancipation is all about, what it should be all about. And I feel very proud of this little country we call Barbados, also known as Ichiruganim. Look what we have experienced so far. Listen to the consciousness that emanated from a Barbados minister of government, followed by a poet, followed by our cultural ambassador. Ladies and gentlemen, what you have heard so far is a very elevated level of consciousness, something that perhaps we take for granted in Barbados, but we really should not. It is the product of a lot of very hard work that this country has done in the arena of culture, in the arena of the arts, in the way in which our historians have helped us to identify the struggle against slavery, symbolized by the Right Excellent General Bussa, the Workers' Rebellion of the 1930s, symbolized by the Right Excellent Clement Payne, the way in which we have elevated that history. We have made these men national heroes, and we celebrate these towering episodes in our history in a very serious way at the highest levels of our government. On Friday, we will be in the magnificent 2-acre Golden Square Freedom Park. On Friday, celebrating our Day of National Significance, presided over by the Prime Minister of Barbados. You know, and we are on the right track. We are on the right track. And I want to talk a little bit about the struggle of oppressed people against the resistance of oppressed people. And you know, this is a topic that is perhaps more germane to the people of Barbados than almost any other people on the face of this earth, because the Barbadian has had a peculiar type of oppression, perhaps one of the most intense forms of oppression that any other group of people have experienced. And so, you know, our history is one of victimization and suffering on the one hand, but also of resistance, of courage, of heroism, of determination, of resilience. And so we are a product of those two streams, not just victimization and suffering. Yes, that is part of our story, but we must never singularly focus on that, because with that went resistance and heroism. And why do I say that Barbados is peculiar, is unique? Well, as the historians have told us, Barbados was the world's first slave society. The world's first out-and-out slave society. Not that You didn't have societies before Barbados that had slavery as a feature, yes. But Barbados was the first society that was constructed totally on the basis of slavery. A society in which not only was the enslaved portion of the population the majority, but also a society in which the economy, the very basis of economic survival, the social system, the governing ideology, virtually everything about the society was built around the institution of slavery. And the ideology of slavery was consolidated right here in Barbados. The ideology of whiteness, the very concept of whiteness, the ideology of whiteness that we hear all across the political discourse in the United States of America today, make America white again, was invented right here in Barbados. And I mean, some of these claims might sound strange to you, but I will prove it. I will prove it. So, we know that English colonization started in Barbados in 1625, 1627, when they settled permanently. They started with an agricultural colony, with white indentured labor, first of all. And in those early days, there was no concept of whiteness. There were the planter class, the planter barons. There were what they referred to as the dissolute English poor, indentured servants. There were the Scotch and the Irish that they looked down upon, all indentured labor. But they had no sense of being a white group. But then we have the sugar revolution in Barbados in the 1640s. And sugar required not little pockets of indentured labor. Sugar required massive inputs of labor. Highly industrialized industry requiring not just a lot of capital investment, but massive investment of labor. And so they turned their eyes to Africa. And by about 1660, the population, the enslaved African population had become the majority. And the sugar barons, as they were, recognized that they had a problem. There's a man called Richard Lygon, an Englishman, who came to Barbados in 1647. He stayed here until 1653 years. And he wrote a book called A True and Exact History of the Island of Barbados. It was published in 1657. And he said, that people ask, how come this white minority is able to hold this black enslaved majority under control? How is it? He said there are three factors. One, we have a monopoly on all the weapons. We make sure no weapons are available to the enslaved blacks. We monopolize all of the weapons. Secondly, we have a deliberate policy of splitting up African language groups on the plantation. So you don't bring people from the same language group to just be a majority. You split them up so they have a difficulty communicating with each other. And thirdly, we inflict upon them a system of shock and awe to traumatize them. We inflict upon them such horrific violence, the kind of violence that Colin spoke about, that was inflicted on the rebels of 1675, to traumatize them. And then in 1661, the white Barbados House of Assembly decided that they needed to institutionalize this thing. And they, at a time when slavery was abolished in England, the white Barbados House of Assembly decided to institutionalize slavery by passing the 1661 Act for the Better Ordering and Governing of Negroes. And this is where the peculiar oppression of the Barbadian people was constructed. First of all, this act and what went with it, the policies that went with it, was designed to break any sense of solidarity between poor whites and enslaved blacks. Back in 1649, there were two episodes of revolt in Barbados. In 1649, the white indentured servants rose up. Also, you had a rebellion of enslaved blacks in 1649. Back in 1649, there was a sense of class, some sense of class solidarity. The sugar barons decided, no, our security is at risk. We have to put in place a system that creates a concept of whiteness, an ideology of whiteness, where we incorporate the white indentured class within this broader construct of whiteness. And don't take it from me, there's Matthew Parker, who wrote the book, The Sugar Barons, and he makes the point. He said, this racism was a new, he's talking about Barbados in around 1660. This racism was a new departure, as planters who had recently lumped together African slaves and dissolute English, Scotch, and particularly Irish came to realize the usefulness to their security of whiteness. A pamphleteer writing at that time felt it necessary to explain to his readers in England that the word white was, quote, the general name for Europeans. And just as the 1661 acts were copied throughout the English West Indies and in South Carolina, so this new ideology of whiteness was spread from Barbados and carried around the empire. So the concept, the ideology of whiteness was invented here. The 1661 Barbados Slave Code that codified slavery, that sought to give it a quote-unquote legal basis, that created a comprehensive system of oppression and institutionalized it, was crafted right here in Barbados. It was then taken to Jamaica. It was then taken from Jamaica to South Carolina and all across the then 13 colonies of what is today the United States of America. So Barbados was the center of it. And it was in that situation of that institutionalized oppression that in 1675, you had this remarkable rebellion right here in St. Peter. And I'm just going to quote very quickly. This is from the book Testing the Chains by Michael Creighton, Resistance to Slavery in the British West Indies. And quickly, I'm just going to quote here. He's speaking about the 1675 rebellion. And incidentally, he gets his information from a pamphlet that was published in England at the time. The pamphlet was called Great News from the Barbados. A rebellion was plotted by many Coromantee or Gold Coast Negroes over a period of years in such great secrecy that even their wives were in ignorance of it. An ancient Gold Coast Negro called Cuffy was chosen as king, and he was to be crowned on June 12, 1675, in a chair of state exquisitely wrought and carved after their mode, with bows and arrows to be likewise carried in state before His Majesty, their intended king. Trumpets to be made of elephant teeth and gourds to be sounded on several hills to give notice of their general rising, with a full intention to fire the sugar canes and so run in and cut their masters, the planters' throats in their respective plantations whereunto they did belong. These are the actual words of the pamphlet. Anna, alias Fortuna, a domestic slave belonging to Judge Giles Hall, overheard an 18-year-old Coromantee affirming that, quote, he would have no hand in killing the buckaroos or white folks, end of quote, and that he would tell his master. Anna spoke with the young slave, found that a general rising was due in 2 weeks' time, and persuaded him to go with her to tell Judge Hall. Properly alarmed, Hall went in haste to Governor Atkins, who immediately came with his lifeguard to arrest the known conspirators. Martial law was declared, and within days, a summary court was appointed to examine and try more than 100 suspects. 17 slaves were straightway found guilty, of whom 6 were burnt alive and 11 beheaded. The bodies of the latter were dragged through the streets of Speightstown, thought to be the center of the plot, then also publicly burned. One of the leaders, burned alive, was called upon by the provost marshal, that's the superintendent of security, to confess and to name others before he died. The slave called for water, and this was said to be a custom they use before they tell or discover anything. But he was admonished by another, a sturdy rogue, a Jew's Negro, these are the words of the pamphlet, named Tony. And Tony said, thou fool, are there not enough of our countrymen killed already? Art thou minded to kill them all? The slave remained silent, and a spectator called out, quote, Tony, sirrah, we shall see you fry bravely by and by. To which Tony replied haughtily, if you roast me today, you cannot roast me tomorrow. Despite the conspiracy, obviously Tony was roasted, was burnt alive. Despite the conspirators' general refusal to inform, another 25 slaves were subsequently executed. 5 committed suicide in jail, while the remaining 70 were either deported or sent back to their owners after a savage flogging. Tony spoke up to save his fellow rebels. The rebel was on the verge of speaking. I learned from Dr. Derek Murray that when our enslaved ancestors took part in conspiracies like this, that they made an oath. They made a blood oath. And in order to break a blood oath, the custom was that you had to drink water first. So when you hear the man asking for water, it's a sign that he's about to break the oath and he's about to talk. Tony admonished him. Tony spoke up. Tony put himself on the firing line. Admonished him. You don't know how many lives Tony saved by speaking up. So when we talk about struggle, I mean, this is an example of our ancestors. This is the kind of example that we have to live up to. Those are the ancestors that have produced the Barbadian population of today. And ladies and gentlemen, I want to make the point that, we struggled against slavery. We resisted it. And we resisted it like how Cuffy and Tony were resisting it in 1675, how Bussa and the others resisted in 1816, through physical resistance, military resistance. But we also resisted it culturally, through cultural creativity. Because when they brought our ancestors here, they brought them as beasts of burden, as things, as chattels, as simply inputs into a productive process, not as human beings. In fact, they set out to dehumanize them. They denied that they even had any essence of humanity. Our people deposited in these locations of barbarism, these extremely evil slave societies. What did they do? First of all, they protected their inherent humanity. They did not allow that intrinsic humanity to be destroyed. And they went on to resist that barbaric environment. They set out to transform that environment. They were determined that they were going to create a meaningful social existence for themselves, that they were going to transform those locations of barbarism into nurturing, creative, humane, progressive societies. And we have achieved it. And if you catalog the ways in which that cultural resistance was carried out, you go through our literature, the folklore, the poetry, the dance, the spirituality, the aspects of religious expression that they kept, that they held close to protect their inner selves, their psyches, and their craft work. I mean, virtually everything that is good and progressive and creative about these Caribbean societies were produced by the people from down below, the formerly enslaved people and their descendants. And their music, what we heard, that's a slave work song. They produce work songs like that to bolster their spirit, to bolster their solidarity, to bolster their resistance against the oppressive plantation system. And those work songs were the forerunners of what we call the African Caribbean folk music, which is really just a precursor to what we know as calypso. And so when we think about resisting, how our ancestors resisted oppression, we must not only think of the physical military resistance, we must also think, perhaps even more importantly, of the cultural resistance, the cultural creativity that they employed to transform the locations of barbarism and evil into which they were deposited into the nurturing, humane, progressive societies that we inhabit in the Caribbean today. And the calypso, the music, is central to that whole process of cultural resistance. Thank you very much.